Be Me Barry 28. Work as a designer for a company that makes packaging for local products. Not a world-changing job, but it's creative, pays the bills, and I'm good at it. Live a pretty normal life. Got my own place, a few good friends, a car that runs most of the time. About a year ago, I met Jane at a friend's barbecue. She wasn't like other girls I'd met. She had this intense energy, really passionate about her beliefs. Spent most of the night listening to her debate someone else about some social issue. I didn't even agree with half of what she was saying, but I was captivated by how she said it. She was confident, sharp, and didn't back down. Found it attractive, I guess. A change of pace. We talked after her debate opponent rage quit over the last burger. She was surprisingly chill when not in debate mode. We clicked, exchanged numbers, started dating. The first few months were genuinely great. Like, movie montage, great. We went hiking, tried new restaurants, stayed up late talking about everything and nothing. She was funny, smart, and we had real chemistry. It felt like I'd finally found someone I could build something real with. She'd talk about her ideas, about feminism and society, and I'd listen. It all seemed theoretical, just stuff she was passionate about. I thought it was just a part of her, like how I'm passionate about old film photography. The first little flag, so small I didn't even see it as a flag, was in my kitchen. We were making pasta, and she was trying to open a jar of sauce. She was struggling with it, her hands slipping. I reached over, took it from her, and twisted the lid off with a pop, handed it back with a smile. She smiled back, but it was a little tight. She said something like, "Thanks, but the Damsel in Distress Act isn't necessary." I would have gotten it. I just laughed. No problem, just helping out. Didn't think anything of it. It was just a jar. But that was the beginning of the shift. The little comments started to pop up more often. We'd be watching a movie, an old action flick I liked, and she'd start pointing things out. It wasn't a discussion, it was a lecture. She'd explain how the male hero was a classic example of toxic masculinity, how his stoicism was emotional suppression, how his heroism was just a form of patriarchal violence. At first I'd try to engage, maybe offer a different perspective. I'd say maybe he's just a character in a simple story. That got shut down fast. My opinion was dismissed as me having internalized patriarchal norms. I wasn't seeing the world correctly, she was. It got to the point where I stopped suggesting movies. It was easier to just let her pick something she could approve of. Then the tests began. I didn't realize they were tests at the time, of course. I just thought she was having a bad day, or we were out of sync. I remember one day, my boss had ripped apart a project I'd spent a month on. I came home feeling completely defeated, just drained. Jean was on the couch, reading. All I wanted was a hug, just to hold her for a minute and forget about my day. I walked over and put my arms around her from behind. She stiffened immediately. She didn't push me away, but she went rigid. She asked what was wrong. I told her I had a terrible day at work and just needed a hug. She let out a little sigh, the kind of sound a teacher makes when a student gives the wrong answer for the 10th time. She told me that my expectation for her to manage my emotions was a heavy burden, that men are socialized to use women for unpaid emotional labor instead of learning to process their own feelings. I was just standing there, arms still loosely around her. I was floored. I tried to explain that it wasn't about her managing anything. It was about connection, about seeking comfort from the person you love when you feel like crap. She just shook her head, telling me I didn't understand, because I was looking at it from a position of privilege. I let go and went to the other room. There was no hug that night. Intimacy, in general, started to become transactional. It wasn't something that happened naturally between two people who cared for each other. It became a reward system. If I agreed with her on a certain point, if I showed I was learning and growing, then maybe she'd be in the mood. If I disagreed, or just seemed tired of the constant lectures, there was a sudden chill in the air. She'd say she wasn't attracted to willful ignorance. She once sent me a link to an article, a long essay about how all conventional male behavior is rooted in a desire to dominate. She told me to read it, and that we could talk about it later. The implication was clear. The evening's atmosphere depended on my performance in the discussion. I felt like I was constantly being graded, like our relationship was a class I was failing. The weirdest part was that she would frame all of this as her helping me. She was deprogramming me from the toxic masculinity I'd been raised in. She was making me a better man. and when I would get frustrated, she'd act surprised and hurt. She'd say she was only trying to build a truly equal partnership, and my resistance was proof of how much work still needed to be done. It was dizzying. I started to feel like I was walking on eggshells in my own home. I couldn't just be. Every action, every word, every gesture was being analyzed and interpreted through this specific lens. If I offered to carry the heavy groceries, I was implying she was weak. If I didn't offer, I was lazy and entitled. There was no right answer. I was just a man, and therefore inherently flawed. Her friends were the same way. When they'd come over, the conversation was always the same. It was a circle of agreement, a constant reinforcement of their worldview. They'd share stories about men at their jobs, men on the street, men in their families. All the stories had the same conclusion. Men were the problem. They were simple, predictable, and motivated by base desires. I'd just sit there, on my own couch, feeling like an exhibit at a zoo, the average male specimen in his natural habitat. They'd occasionally look at me, and Jean would say, "Oh, Barry's one of the good ones. He's learning." And they'd all smile these tight, knowing smiles, like I was a rescue dog who had learned not to pee on the carpet. It was humiliating. My own friend Justin saw it happening. We'd known each other since we were kids. He can read me like a book. We met up for a beer one night. I think it was after a particularly bad week with Jean. I was trying to play it cool, but he knew something was up. He asked me how things were going. I gave him the usual, "Yeah, good, ups and downs." He just stared at me over his glass. Then he said, "She looks at you like you're a project, not a person." It was so blunt, so direct, that it just broke through all the excuses I'd been making. I finally let it all out. The constant testing, the lectures, the feeling of being perpetually in the wrong. I told him about the emotional labor comment, about the movie nights turning into seminars. I explained how I felt like I couldn't do anything right. He just listened, nodding slowly. He didn't interrupt. When I was done, he was quiet for a minute. He took a drink of his beer. Then he looked me right in the eye. He told me that it wasn't my fault. He said that Jean didn't seem to be in a relationship with me, Barry. She was in a relationship with an idea she had in her head, an idea of man. And her goal wasn't to love me, it was to fix this abstract idea. He said, "She's so convinced she knows what all men want that she's forgotten to ask what you want. Or maybe she just doesn't care." Every word he said felt like a key turning in a lock I didn't even know was there. He wasn't being malicious. He wasn't saying dump her. He was just describing what he saw, and it was the truth. I was a stand-in for her theories, a lab rat for her ideological experiments. My feelings, my personality, my actual self. None of it mattered as much as my role as the man in her relationship dynamic. I tried to defend her a little, out of habit. "She's just really passionate," I said weakly. Justin shook his head. "There's a difference between being passionate and being a zealot. Passionate people want to share what they love. Zealots want to convert you or burn you." That line stuck with me. I drove home that night feeling hollow. The anger and frustration I'd been feeling for months was still there, but now it was underneath a layer of profound sadness. He was right. She didn't see me. When I got back to my apartment, she was there. She'd made dinner, which was rare. She was smiling, acting like everything was perfect. She started telling me about her day, about some guy at her work who had mansplained a topic to her that she was an expert in. She was telling the story for laughs, expecting me to join in on the joke. I couldn't. I just listened, my mind replaying Justin's words over and over. "She doesn't see you." I looked at her, really looked at her, as she was talking, and I realized I wasn't her partner. I was her audience, her case study. Her main theory, the one she came back to again and again, was that men were fundamentally simple. She believed, truly believed, that at the end of the day, all men were driven by one primitive physical desire. Everything else, ambition, love, creativity, kindness, was just window dressing for this one basic urge. She'd say it in different ways. Sometimes it was a joke. Men are just houseplants you have to have sex with. Other times it was more serious, a deep sigh as she talked about the male libido, as if it were a wild animal that needed to be managed. This belief was the foundation of her power in the relationship, because if that one thing was all I truly wanted, then she was the one who controlled it. She could grant it or withhold it. It was her ultimate tool for control, for ensuring I behaved, for making sure I kept learning. And I had let her believe it. I had played along, trying to be a good boyfriend, trying to navigate her impossible rules to get back to the good times we used to have. But sitting there, listening to her talk, I realized those good times were gone. They had been replaced by this performance, this constant draining test of my worthiness. That night, something inside me didn't break. It just went quiet. The part of me that was trying so hard, that was constantly seeking her approval, that was hoping to get the old Jean back, it just gave up. It was a quiet surrender. I decided to stop playing the game, not in an angry, confrontational way. I wasn't going to have a big fight. I was just going to stop. I was going to stop trying. I was going to see what would happen if her theories were put to the ultimate test. What happens when the lab rat stops running the maze for the cheese? I finished my dinner, told her it was good, and went to bed. I didn't try to kiss her goodnight. I didn't reach for her hand. I just turned over and closed my eyes. The experiment had begun. I didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of the end. And I was about to find out that a theory is a very fragile thing when it crashes into reality. She thought she had me all figured out. She thought she knew exactly what I wanted. She was about to find out how wrong she was. The quiet was my only weapon, and it was going to be more effective than any argument I could ever make. The next morning, the dynamic was already different. I got up, made my own coffee, and got ready for work. I was polite, I was civil, but I was distant, like a polite roommate. I didn't ask her about her day ahead. I didn't kiss her goodbye at the door. I just said, "Have a good day," and left. The look on her face was one of slight confusion, like she'd noticed a piece of furniture was a few inches out of place. Something was off, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. She probably assumed I was just tired or still upset about work. She had a rationalization for everything. But this wasn't about one bad day. This was a permanent change. This was me, finally logging off. The first few days of my new approach were quiet, eerily quiet. I'd go to work, come home, make myself dinner, and then work on my own projects or read a book. Jean seemed to be waiting me out. She'd watch me from the corner of her eye, a little smirk on her face. I could practically hear her thinking, "He'll crack. He'll get tired of the silence and come begging for attention. They always do." She'd try to bait me into our old routine. We'd be in the living room, a documentary playing on the TV. She'd say something like, "It's interesting how the narrator is male. It subconsciously positions authority as a masculine trait." In the past, this would have been a 45-minute lecture I was expected to nod along to. Now, I just said, "Huh, interesting," and kept watching. I didn't agree or disagree. I just acknowledged. The lack of friction was like throwing a punch and hitting empty air. It left her off balance. After about a week, her amusement started to curdle into annoyance. The little smirks were gone, replaced by a permanent frown line between her eyebrows. She started trying to create problems that would require my emotional investment. Little things, designed to start a small fire. She'd accidentally shrink one of my favorite sweaters in the laundry. I came home and found it on the bed, doll-sized. I looked at it, looked at her as she stood in the doorway with a fake innocent expression. I knew this was a test. She was waiting for me to get angry, to give her something to work with. I just folded the tiny sweater, put it in the donation pile, and said, "It's okay, accidents happen." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get upset. Her face fell. A flicker of genuine frustration. This wasn't the reaction she wanted. My lack of anger was more infuriating to her than any shouting match could have been. She needed me to be the toxic male her theories described. She needed me to be emotional, irrational, predictable. My calmness was dismantling her entire worldview, brick by brick. The apartment started to feel like a pressure cooker. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy with everything that wasn't being said. She stopped trying to start intellectual debates and moved on to more direct provocations. She started criticizing me, my habits, my hobbies, my friends. One evening, I was cleaning the lenses for my old film camera. It's a hobby I love. It's peaceful, methodical. She watched me for a few minutes, then said, "Photography is just an extension of the male gaze, you know, capturing and possessing an image. It's inherently an act of control." The old me would have defended myself, explained what the hobby meant to me. The new me just kept wiping the lens. I said, "You can see it that way if you want." Her eyes narrowed. "What other way is there to see it?" I shrugged. "I just like the way the pictures look." It was a simple, honest answer, and it completely disarmed her argument. She couldn't debate, "I like it." It wasn't a political statement. It was a personal feeling. And she had no framework for dealing with my actual personal feelings, only the ones she assumed I should have. Her next tactic was to try and make me jealous. She'd start talking about a guy at her office, Mark. She'd bring him up constantly. How smart Mark was, how funny Mark was, how Mark really understood the complexities of modern social dynamics. She'd tell stories where he was the hero. Mark totally shut down this other guy in a meeting today. It was amazing. He used a perfect feminist critique of his proposal. I'd just nod. Sounds like a smart guy. There was no jealousy, no suspicion, no anger, because I genuinely didn't care. It was like watching a play. The actors were trying very hard, but I knew the story wasn't real. I was no longer a participant. I was just in the audience. Her frustration was becoming palpable. She started making more noise, taking up more space. She'd have long, loud phone calls with her friends in the living room, clearly performing for my benefit. The conversations were always the same. She'd complain about my behavior, but in her specific jargon. "He's completely withdrawn. It's like a textbook case of weaponized incompetence and emotional stonewalling. He's trying to punish me for holding him accountable." I'd be in the other room, hearing every word. It didn't even hurt anymore. It was just data. More proof that Justin was right. She didn't see me. She saw a textbook case, a series of symptoms to be diagnosed. Her friends would, of course, agree with her completely. I'd hear them through the phone, their voices blending into a chorus of validation. "You're so strong for dealing with that." That's what they do when they feel their privilege is threatened. "He'll come crawling back. They can't survive without a woman to take care of them." It was all based on one core assumption, that I was desperate for something only she could provide, that my life would crumble without her approval, her attention, her intimacy. They couldn't conceive of a reality where I was simply okay, a reality where I was happier in the quiet than I had been in the noise of her constant judgment. The atmosphere grew colder. We were living parallel lives in a 600-square-foot space. We'd pass each other in the hallway without making eye contact. We ate at different times. We went to bed at different times. The only communication we had was about logistics. "The rent is due tomorrow," or "the trash needs to go out." It was functional, but completely devoid of life. One night, I came home and she was dressed up. Like, really dressed up. A nice dress, makeup, the whole thing. She was just sitting on the couch, pretending to read a book. It was so obvious what she was doing. She was trying to get a reaction, a compliment, anything. I walked in, put my keys down. I said, "Hey." She looked up, a hopeful glint in her eyes. I went to the kitchen, got a glass of water, and went to my room to change. I didn't say a word about her dress. I heard a sharp exhale from the living room, a sound of pure frustration. Later that evening, she confronted me. It was the first real confrontation since my shutdown. She stood in the doorway of my room, arms crossed. Her face was a mask of anger and confusion. "What is your problem, Barry?" she demanded. Her voice was shaking slightly. "I don't have a problem," I said calmly, not looking up from my book. This is the problem. This whole silent act. It's childish. It's manipulative. It's a form of emotional abuse, you know." I finally looked up at her. "I'm not being silent to punish Eugene. I'm just quiet," she scoffed. "What's the difference?" "The difference," I said, choosing my words carefully, "is intent. The silent treatment is a tool to make someone feel bad and force them to change. I'm not trying to make you do anything. I'm just done talking." "Done talking? About what?" "About everything," I said. "About my toxic masculinity, about my internalized privilege, about how every movie is a patriarchal plot. I'm just done with the lectures. I'm tired of being a student in my own relationship." She stared at me, her mouth slightly open. She had no response for that. It was the simple truth, and it bypassed all of her complex theories. She tried to regain control, falling back on her usual script. "So, because I try to have a mature, conscious relationship, you shut down? That just proves how fragile the male ego is." I just gave a small, tired smile. Maybe, I said. Or maybe I'm just a person, not an ego, and that person is tired of being treated like a project. I went back to my book. That was the end of the conversation. She stood there for another minute, fuming, but she knew she had lost. She couldn't win an argument with someone who wasn't arguing. She couldn't re-educate someone who had dropped out of her class. After that night, a new kind of desperation set in. Her main weapon was gone. Withholding affection and intimacy meant nothing because I was no longer asking for it. I had taken away her power by simply not wanting what she was offering. It was like trying to threaten a fish with drowning. The dynamic had completely flipped. She was the one who was now constantly trying to get my attention. She was the one who felt ignored, invisible. She was the one who felt like she was living with a roommate, not a partner. Everything she had made me feel for months, she was now feeling herself. And she couldn't stand it. I'd see her watching me sometimes, with this look of complete and utter bewilderment on her face. It was like she was looking at a math problem that was supposed to be simple, but she kept getting the wrong answer. Her friend's advice wasn't working. Her provocations weren't working. Her criticisms weren't working. Her attempts at seduction weren't working. She had tried everything in her playbook, and none of it had any effect. I was a blank wall, a polite, civil, but completely impenetrable wall. I wasn't mean. I wasn't cruel. I was just absent. My mind, my heart, my energy. They were no longer in the relationship. I was just a body occupying the same physical space. And this slow, quiet absence was driving her crazier than any fight ever could have. She had spent our entire relationship telling me that men only wanted one thing. It was her mantra, her gospel, the central pillar of her entire belief system about men and women. She had used it as a threat, as a promise, as a tool of manipulation. She had built her throne on that idea. Now, the throne was crumbling because the one man in her life, the one she was so sure she had figured out, was showing zero interest in that one thing. It broke her brain. If her core premise was wrong, then everything else was wrong too. Her understanding of me, her understanding of men, her understanding of power. It was all built on a foundation of sand, and the tide was coming in. She was about to make one last desperate move, a final all-or-nothing bet to prove her theory, to herself more than to me. She was going to offer me the ultimate prize, the one thing she was convinced I couldn't refuse. She was about to learn a lesson that no article or theory could ever teach her, the lesson that when you treat a person like an object for long enough, they eventually stop wanting the person who is treating them that way. It wasn't about the one thing, it was about everything. And everything was already broken. She just didn't know it yet. But she would, very soon. The final act started on a random weeknight. I don't remember the day, maybe a Tuesday or Wednesday. It was dark outside. I had gotten home from work, eaten a sandwich, and was in my room sketching out some design ideas for a personal project. It was quiet in the apartment. Too quiet. For the past few weeks, Jean had been almost manic, a bundle of nervous energy. Loud phone calls, slamming cabinets, heavy sighs. But tonight, there was nothing. Just silence. I should have known something was up. Around 9 p.m., my bedroom door opened. I looked up from my sketchbook. It was Jean, but not the Jean I had been living with for the past month. She had done her hair, put on makeup. She was wearing a silk robe that I hadn't seen in a long time. She was holding 2 glasses of wine. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood in the doorway, giving me a look that was meant to be seductive. It was a performance, a carefully calculated move. This was her checkmate. She walked into the room and handed me a glass of wine. I took it, mostly out of reflex. I just looked at her, waiting. She sat on the edge of my bed, which was a clear violation of the unspoken Cold War treaty we'd been operating under. She took a sip of her wine, her eyes never leaving mine. "We can't go on like this, Barry," she said, her voice low and soft. It was the voice she used in the very beginning, before the lectures and the tests. I didn't say anything. I just waited. "I miss you," she said. "I miss us." I still didn't speak. I knew this was a script. "I know I can be a lot," she continued, forcing a small, self-deprecating laugh. "I'm just passionate. I just want us to be the best we can be." She was framing her behavior as a virtue, a classic move. "I know what you need," she said, her voice dropping even lower. "I know what you've been missing. She put her glass down on the nightstand. She moved closer to me on the bed. The robe she was wearing fell open slightly. It was very deliberate. This was it, the final gambit. She was offering me the one thing, the ultimate prize she had been withholding, the thing she believed was the source of all her power. She was so sure of the outcome. In her mind, this was the reset button. My simple male brain would see the opportunity for physical intimacy and forget everything else. All the lectures, the insults, the tests, they would all be washed away. I would become the predictable, simple creature from her theories, and the power dynamic would snap back into place. She would be in control again. I could see the confidence in her eyes, the certainty. She reached out a hand to touch my face, and I moved back. Not a big movement, just a slight lean away. But it was enough. Her hand stopped in midair. The confident smile on her face wavered. I looked at her, not with anger or resentment, but with a kind of weary finality. I took a sip of my wine. Then I put the glass down on the floor, next to my chair, and I said, "No, thank you." 2 words, just, "No, thank you." I said it in the same tone I would use if a server offered me coffee I didn't want. Polite, calm, and completely, utterly final. Her face went through a series of emotions so fast it was like watching a film in fast forward. First, confusion, as if she had misheard me. Then, disbelief, as if I had just started speaking a foreign language. Then, a flash of genuine panic. Her entire world, her entire operating system, had just crashed. The one unbreakable rule of her universe had just been broken. The man had said no to the one thing. "What?" she whispered. Her voice was a thin, reedy sound. "What did you just say?" "I said no, thank you," I repeated, my voice even and steady. "I'm not interested." She recoiled as if I had slapped her. The seductive mask fell away completely, revealing the raw, ugly confusion beneath. "Not interested?" she stammered, her voice rising. "What do you mean you're not interested? This is all you ever want. This is all any of you ever want." She wasn't talking to me anymore. She was yelling at a ghost, at the abstract man from her theories. "This is just another one of your games, isn't it? You're trying to punish me." And that's when I finally stood up. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad anymore. I just felt clear. "This isn't a game, Jean," I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the silent room. "You spent months, our entire relationship really, telling me what I am, telling me what I want. You told me I was a simple creature, driven by one basic need. You told me my kindness was a trick, my emotions were a burden, and my love was just a strategy to get what I wanted." She just stared at me, speechless. "You used intimacy as a weapon," I continued. "You held it over my head like a prize for good behavior. You made it something I had to earn by passing your ideological purity tests. Well, congratulations. You were very convincing. You convinced me." I looked her right in the eye. "You convinced me that you saw me as nothing more than an animal, a simple thing to be managed and controlled. And after a while, I started to believe you. I started to see myself through your eyes, and I didn't like it. So I stopped. I stopped wanting your approval. I stopped wanting your attention. And I stopped wanting this." I gestured vaguely towards her. The realization was slowly dawning on her face. The true horror of it, from her perspective. "It was never about just one thing, Jean," I said, delivering the final lines. "I wanted a partner. I wanted connection. I wanted respect. I wanted to be seen for who I am, not for what you think my gender represents. You weren't interested in giving me any of that. You were only interested in being right. You think I want just one thing? The truth is, right now, from you, I want nothing." The word nothing hung in the air between us. It was the end. Her face crumbled. The anger, the confusion, it all dissolved into a look of absolute defeat. She had lost. Not to me, but to her own rigid, unyielding ideology. She had built a prison of theory and ended up trapping herself inside it. I walked past her, out of the bedroom. I grabbed a duffel bag from the hall closet and started putting a few things in it. A change of clothes, my toothbrush, my sketchbook. She didn't move from the bed. She just sat there, in her silk robe, in the room that was suddenly half empty. I didn't say goodbye. There was nothing left to say. I walked out of the apartment and closed the door behind me. I didn't slam it. I just closed it quietly. I went to Justin's place. He opened the door, took one look at my face and the bag in my hand, and just nodded. He didn't say, "I told you so." He just stepped aside and let me in. We spent the rest of the night on his couch, playing some old video game we used to play as kids. We didn't talk about her. We didn't talk about what happened. We didn't have to. For the first time in over a year, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't a project. I wasn't a case study. I wasn't a stereotype. I was just Barry, and I wanted nothing, which, it turns out, is the first step to having everything that actually matters.